everybody. Welcome to another episode of The Conversation for Our Generation. My name is Nick Jamel, the creator of The Conversation for Our Generation, where we are solving the problems of today with the wisdom of the past. And today, we will be reviewing 19th century thought, The Discovery of Change by Richard Schoenwald. And not sure if I said his last name there correctly, but I think this is an important book to check out, to read, if you're looking to understand what changed in the 19th century and what I think this book really still has an impact on the way we look at the world in a lot of ways. He looks at several big thinkers there's H.R. Gregg, but the top three that you would know for sure are John Stuart Mill, Karl Marx, Charles Darwin. He also has Herbert Spencer and Jacob Burckhardt, who are all philosophers of some sort trying to, or scientists, but also grappling with this idea of change. He makes a good point that in the 19th century rather, there was this first time where change was something that you saw during your lifetime, right? It wasn't something that happened over the course of a couple hundred years or more even. It was something that happened from the time you were a kid to the time you were an adult. And we can see that now. And I think these are thinkers that were trying to grapple with that concept in some way. And so that's why I think it's important to look at, and it's important to understand why. And so that's what we're going to be reviewing. Before I dive too far into all of that, I want to remind you that you can check out The Conversation for Our Generation at the website, conversationforourgeneration.com. Find all sorts of different things there. You can watch the interviews that I've been doing. I have a new subscription there. So if you want to watch the full interview, you can go to the website. It's $2 a month to get the silver level subscription, and that will allow you to view all of the interviews that I've been doing recently. You can also check out the snippets and everything else on the YouTube channel and on social. I definitely still share that stuff out there. But if you want to watch the full interview, definitely hop over there. You can always listen as well on the podcast, wherever you find your podcast. Check it out, subscribe, wherever you're listening to this. And if you're not on your podcast player, if you're on the website, something like that, definitely head over to your podcast players, subscribe to The Conversation for Our Generation, and leave it a good rating and review if you're enjoying it, because that helps this spread even more. So also, lastly, definitely go to Twitter at @ConOfOurGen, or follow me on Facebook, facebook.com/Conversation for Our Generation, to just keep up with everything that's going on. New stuff that comes out will get posted there. Conversations are happening, especially on Twitter. So definitely check that out as well. And so let's hop into a quick quote that I think will help set the stage for us a little bit. This is from Charles Darwin, and this is the earth-shattering discovery that he had that really rocked the world. And he says, "I have called this principle by which each slight variation, if useful, is preserved, by the term of natural selection." And this is really where his thought gets interesting, and where I think where his discovery was not quite right, I guess. And if you listen to Jordan Peterson and some of the other evolutionary biologists that are out there, they will say that this idea of just random selection is not fully correct, that it wasn't fully random. I mean, that there is a sense of sexual selection, that there is a sense of some sort of choice, especially the higher up you get in the system. And when you get to people especially, we really don't have a sense of natural selection by which we choose our mates. They kind of tried to lay on the colors of certain birds and peacocks and all that, and lay that onto the way that men might try to show off wealth in order to attract women, or whatever it is. Women might put on a lot of makeup in order to attract men. But our selection process is different. And I think that when they started to lay on this randomness, this sort of materialist almost assumption that underlays all this, that we are just atoms bumping into each other, that this thought went really wrong. And that's where Marx also gets a lot of his thought from. He dedicated, I don't know if it was the first volume, I think this book tells you that it was potentially the second volume of Das Kapital to Charles Darwin, because he liked the way he thought so much. And so this was, I think, a huge part of the influence that might have gone wrong, actually, with the 19th century. And the author in this, I will say, is very pro Marx and Darwin in the way he talks. And he kind of seems to me to bend John Stuart Mill to fit in with their vision of things, when I don't think he does. I think he stands alone, and I think he's got things that he's right and wrong on, but I think that John Stuart Mill is definitely separate from those two in the way that he thought. But this idea of natural selection is something that is hugely destructive. I think that when we started to reduce the free choice that humans have to this idea that we don't actually have free choice, that we are simply just randomly making decisions based on some predestined event, some causal chain, then all of a sudden, I think it strips us of our humanity, and it strips us of really the dignity that we have. And that's where I think a lot of the 19th century thought led to the bad thought of the 20th century, with communism, with Nazism, with just this utilitarian way of thinking. Even Americans dropping the atomic bomb, I think, is another way of just how much we had detached ourselves from the humanity of others. And so, like I said, a lot of changes started happening in the 18th century, and by the 19th century, it was just full steam ahead. I mean, this 18th century saw a lot of change. You had the American Revolution, the French Revolution. There was a lot of stuff happening, but there was, like I said, a different rate of change happening in the 19th century. It's almost like Moore's Law was unobservable until this kind of turn from the 18th to 19th century, when factories and all this stuff really started to make people have to behave differently to live in society. And I think all that change really was destabilizing. It seems that that's really where this new school of thought arose. And really a lot of it was marked by how to grapple with this change. And so I want to talk a little bit about how these philosophers sort of laid the groundwork for progressivism, because that's really what a lot of this is this is the ideological background that led to the progressivist ideology. And so progressivism really preaches this inevitable outcome, that we are marching towards some future state, some utopia, and we're going to get there. It's how fast can we get to this utopia? If we have to break a few eggs on the way, that's okay, because we're going towards perfection, towards the perfect society. And obviously, after 100 years of reflecting on this and seeing what that idea does, I think we can say that we're not headed towards utopia. And the utilitarian consequentialist way of thinking about that is dreadful and causes tremendous pain and suffering, tremendous amount of death, and is a horrible, horrible thing. So I think now, looking back on it, we can say that. But thinkers like Darwin and Marx did not have that vantage point. So you can always, I think that we have to forgive some people for having bad ideas or doing bad things in the past, because they didn't have the perspective that we now have once you see those ideas play out. And especially when it comes to like sort of political, or I don't know, some of those ideas that are out there that really aren't the same as Newtonian physics, for instance, where it's just applying math to the forces of gravity. It's how do we understand how people interact? That's a very complicated issue. And so I think that they have been proven wrong, but their ideas haven't been completely demolished, and their body of work, while it's taken numerous hits, is still largely influential in our culture. And I think that that idea of marching towards some inevitable utopia, this idea of we are determinist, this kind of determinist way of looking at the world, that we are either going to rebel or follow what our parents say based on our genetics and all of this stuff. And it's not true. I think that the fact that the rest of their ideas have collapsed shows that this idea should go with it. And we really haven't had the progress that they said. We have had technological progress. We've had brand new inventions. I mean, and really all that's been driven not by socialism, which Marx would have argued for, but by capitalism. All of the really positive thrust of the last 100 years has come from capitalism and from people inventing things and selling them and innovating to do that. Where we've had the negative side of things has been from this tearing down of individual responsibility. We've seen people stop going to church. We've seen people, think like a consequentialist or a utilitarian instead of trying to do good and maybe even suffer injustice, because committing an injustice to no longer suffer injustice is wrong, like Socrates would have said, like Jesus would have said. People aren't picking up their cross and carrying it, and instead are just saying, I want to feel good. I want to do what I want, and, kind of drifting into this nihilism that comes with sort of the Marxist, Darwinist, and then also I'll throw Nietzsche in there, but he wasn't necessarily on this idea of change in this book, but I think his philosophy as well really has, for people who haven't heard the answer to his philosophy and to the questions he posed, I think it still has a big influence. And because of all that, I think we've had a huge regress morally, ethically, that 250 years ago, we had very big evils. We had slavery. We had a lot of, animus towards other ethnicities and races. And yes, I'm glad that we healed a lot of those things and are much better at that. But we now kill hundreds of thousands of children a year in the womb. Is that better? Are we moral betters when we allow abortion, when we just topple regimes that may not be great, like we have in Libya or Iraq, and then you leave a power vacuum and allow for potentially even worse people to come up? I don't know. We do a lot of immoral things still. So have we moved towards progress? And all of that stuff is in the name of progressivism and spreading these Western ideals. And there's a quote here from John Stuart Mill where he says, all political revolutions not affected by foreign conquest originate in moral revolutions. The subversion of established institutions is merely one consequence of the previous subversion of established opinions. And I think we're seeing this right now. I think we're seeing, for better or for worse, a subversion of the established American ideas in favor of this PC culture, this postmodernist thought, Marxism, especially kind of cultural Marxism. And we're seeing that subvert the way we thought before. And I don't know. I think that hopefully we can maybe have another counter revolution of opinion that does not get violent, that revives those ideas in a new light, in a new way that is relevant to our time, because these are eternal principles. But like I always say, you have to take the eternal truths and apply them properly to the moment, right? Gravity, if you want to jump high, you may say we should loosen up the gravity so I can jump higher. But the other thing is, if you want to stay on the planet and you don't want things floating around, we need the gravity. So it's like you can, and I know that's not the best example, but the idea is these are eternal things. We can mess with them and use them and apply the certain ones that apply to certain situations, but we have to recognize that these eternal truths are eternal and that they are true no matter what. They just may not always apply to the current situation. And so for this book, I think it's a really dense read for sure. I mean, these people are dense thinkers, but despite that, I really enjoyed it. I think you'll just need to have some dedicate some attention and some energy towards it as you read it, and really be watchful, because I think there's a lot in here that on its surface sounds right, but then when you dive into the implications is not. So I also recommend that for those of you out there who maybe don't know what they're pushing back against, to read what they are arguing against first, right? Go back to the founding fathers and before, to Aristotle, to Socrates, to the Bible, and understand the culture and really even stuff in between the founding fathers and that time. But you have to understand what they're pushing back and rebelling against. And I think that this collection of works, it's just their writings with some stuff from the author saying what they're going to say. I skipped a lot of that, unless I needed to go back and just be like, what exactly did I read? Because I'm a little confused. I would then go back and do that. It's up to you how you want to read that, but I think that you will see and understand how this laid the groundwork for progressivism if you go in and check out this book. But I recommend, if you're interested, definitely go buy it through the links on the website and the show notes, wherever you're listening, and get the book. Let me know what you think, and let's continue to get this dialogue going. I want to hear what books out there you're reading, what conversations I should be having. I have another interview coming up with the Stained Glass Zealot next Tuesday, but are there other people out there that I should be talking to? Let me know. If you have them, conversationfourgeneration.com/contact is a great place to get a hold of me. Twitter, my DMs are open. You can always, if you're out there and you're a thinker and you hear this, see this, let me know and DM me on Twitter, anything like that. And let's get this dialogue going, like I said. And so thank you for listening to this episode of The Conversation of Our Generation. I'll talk to you next time.